Welcome back to Reg Talk UK, the podcast that helps UK banking professionals stay sharp, stay informed, and stay ahead of regulation. I'm Alex.
And I'm Jamie.
Well, as trick-or-treaters were out collecting sweets this week, it felt like UK regulators and politicians were handing out rather different kinds of shocks.
Yeah, definitely.
We saw, the removal of Prince Andrew's titles, and even the Chancellor had to apologize for, failing to get a landlord license for her London home.
It really was a week where it seemed like nobody was immune from the rule book, was it? Royalty, senior politicians.
Absolutely.
But, for financial services, the real story, I think, was this clash, this collision between long-term structural changes, things like the PRA's new capital rules, and these immediate, almost devastating financial pressures.
You mean like the motor finance fallout?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And the looming fiscal black hole we keep hearing about.
Right. That tension seems like the perfect place to start our deep dive today. We want to get into the most critical regulatory and fiscal updates you need. So should we kick off with that long-term piece? The strong and simple framework?
Yeah, let's do that. This is a really significant post-Brexit simplification push from the PRA. It's all about boosting competition by, cutting the compliance burden for what they call small domestic deposit takers, or SDDTs.
And they've just published near-final policies?
There's PS 2025. It confirms the new sort of streamlined capital regime will kick in from the 1st of January 2027.
Okay, 2027 feels a way off, but I guess the planning needs to start much sooner, especially around simplifying the capital stack.
Absolutely. The big change here is replacing the current pretty complex system, the CCOB, the CCIB, the PRA buffer, all that.
Right.
They're moving to just one single buffer, the single capital buffer, or SCB.
And what's the level for that?
The minimum is set at 3.5% of risk-weighted assets.
Yeah.
But crucially, they're getting rid of those really punitive automatic distribution restrictions, the MDA rules.
So the idea is that banks hitting the buffer don't immediately have to slam the brakes on lending or bonuses.
Exactly. The old buffers, they often meant firms had to stop doing business the second they touched them, even if they were still perfectly solvent. It wasn't really acting like a usable buffer.
So the thinking is more behavioral. Create a buffer that firms could actually dip into during stress, allowing them to keep functioning. That sounds like it could genuinely help smaller firms compete.
It should do, yeah. And linked to that, the PRA is also formally retiring the old refined methodology for Pillar 2A.
Why was that even there?
Well, it's kind of a patch, really, to try and bridge the gap in risk sensitivity between how small firms calculated risk weights versus the big banks using internal models.
Right.
The PRA is basically saying now that the new Basel 3.1 standardized approach, when it comes in, is risk-sensitive enough on its own. So no need for the potch anymore. It simplifies the whole capital stack, makes it clear.
Okay, so more transparency, consistency, and less paperwork, I hope.
Oh, definitely less paperwork.
Yeah.
SDDTs are being descoped from, get this, 51 regulatory reporting templates in total.
51! Wow, that's a huge operational saving.
Yeah.
Must free up compliance teams quite a bit.
It's a massive lift, yeah. But, and this is key, there's a crucial deadline coming up much sooner, 31st March 2026.
What's that for?
That's the deadline for SDT-eligible firms to tell the PRA they want in. They need to consent, or at least signal they intend to consent, to the modification by consent if they want to use the simplified regime from day one in 2027.
Okay, so a big strategic decision needed pretty soon. Right. Let's pivot from that long-term structural stuff to something much more immediate and, frankly, quite alarming, the motor finance issue. It feels like it's escalating into a full-blown war between the industry and the FCA.
War is maybe a strong word, but the tension is incredibly high.
Yeah.
We're talking about a potential cost hitting, what, $11 billion?
11 billion. Where does that number come from?
It's estimate, obviously. But it breaks down to roughly 8.2 billion outs in direct redress to consumers for those historic commission deals, plus another 2.8 billion in associated costs.
That's staggering. I saw Lloyd's Banking Group warn this could wipe out something like 2 decades of profit for the sector.
Yeah, 20 years of profitability.
Yeah.
That shows you the scale. And it's leading to some really unusual moves. Santander UK actually delayed reporting their Q3 earnings because of the uncertainty.
And didn't their chief executive make quite a public statement?
He did, Mike Regnier. He publicly called for the government to step in and effectively overrule the FCA on this. He used phrases like unintended consequences for the car finance market, the supply of credit, and the broader UK economy.
Asking the government to overrule the regulator, that's bold.
It's extraordinary, really. It potentially undermines regulatory independence, but it just shows how existential this feels for the big lenders involved.
Do you think it's even politically feasible for the government to do that? Wouldn't overturning the FCA send a terrible signal to international investors about UK regulation?
It puts the government in a very tricky spot, doesn't it? But regardless, the FCA seems to be pushing ahead. Nikhil Rathi, the CEO, is apparently heading to Detroit
Detroit? Why?
to talk directly to the big global car manufacturers, Ford, BMW, Stellantis, people like that. Their finance arms are obviously deeply involved and are expected to take significant financial hits. The fact he's going there suggests they mean business. Provisions are already being made. The market knows it's real.
And the FCA isn't just focused on the redress, is it? They're also looking at the claims process now.
Yeah, they've launched this £1 million ad campaign, basically telling consumers they don't need to use claims management companies' CMCs.
Trying to make sure people get the full amount they're due.
Partly that, and partly making sure CMC fees are, quote, proportionate to the benefits provided. That's consumer duty language coming through. They've apparently already requested changes or removal of over 700 financial promotions related to motor finance claims just since January.
Wow, so tackling the past issue and policing the present fallout simultaneously?
Seems like it. It's a major regulatory effort on multiple fronts.
Okay, let's pause there for a moment. If you're finding this useful, don't forget to follow Reg Talk UK on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube. It really helps us reach more compliance professionals like you.
Right, moving on from conduct risk fallout to, well, acute macro pressures. Let's talk about the budget. It's coming up on November 26th, and it's looking absolutely critical, isn't it?
It really is. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is apparently facing a much bigger fiscal hole than expected, potentially up to £22 billion.
Yeah, that number jumped mainly because the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, had to downgrade its productivity forecasts by about 0.3 percentage points, I think.
And lower productivity means lower expected growth, which means less tax revenue, widening that gap.
Precisely, which increases the pressure for, well, finding more money. Hence all the talk about another big tax-raising budget.
And the expectation is more stealth taxes.
That seems to be the main mechanism, yes. Things like freezing income tax thresholds beyond 2028. It doesn't feel like a tax rise immediately, but as wages go up with inflation, more and more people get dragged into higher tax brackets without any change in policy. It's silent, but effective.
And this macro pressure must feed directly into the mortgage market, although weirdly, we've actually seen rates coming down a bit recently.
Yeah, it's an odd dynamic. We had slightly better than expected inflation figures back in September. CPI hit 3.8%, and that seems to have triggered a bit of a mini price war among lenders.
Who's involved?
We've seen Santander, Barclays, HSBC all cutting fixed rates. NatWest is now offering a 2-year fixed deal, I think, for buyers at 3.77%.
3.77%, that's quite a drop and really important for people coming off fixed deals soon.
Hugely important. There's something like 950,000 homeowners whose fixed deals are ending in the next 6 months. So any reduction is welcome.
But there's always a but, isn't there? These gains could be short-lived.
That's the worry, yes. If the budget announcement on the 26th, combined with those gloomy OBR forecasts, makes the market nervous about future government borrowing.
Then gilt yields could spike.
Exactly. And rising gilt yields almost immediately feed through into higher mortgage swap rates, which would likely reverse these recent rate cuts pretty quickly. Borrowers are kind of in a race against the Chancellor's announcement.
Okay. Sticking with housing, but moving to structural law again, we saw the Renters' Rights Bill finally get royal assent. That's quite historic, isn't it?
It really is. It received royal assent on October 27th. This is the law that abolishes Section 21 no-fault evictions. It affects, what, around 11 million tenants in England?
So a big deal for tenants. What about the implications for banks, for lenders?
It's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think. On one hand, you could argue that giving tenants more security and financial stability should, make them better credit risks, more reliable payers.
Okay, that makes sense. Better for consumer lending.
But the flip side is for buy-to-let lenders. Removing Section 21 makes it harder and potentially slower for a landlord to regain possession of their property if needed.
So that increases the perceived risk for the lender.
Potentially, yes. It might complicate their lending models, maybe make them slightly more cautious, or perhaps even nudge up the cost of buy-to-let mortgages. It's that classic trade-off. Consumer protection versus perceived asset risk for the lender.
And we have to mention the irony, don't we? This historic act passes in the same week the Chancellor apologizes for not having the right license for her own rental property.
Yes, the selective landlord license issue. It does rather bring home that point about the rulebook applying to everyone eventually.
Indeed. Right, let's shift focus again, maybe towards operational resilience and the general threat landscape. The FCA made headlines with a conviction this week.
Yes, a really significant one. Their first ever conviction under the Data Protection Act 2018.
What was the case?
It involved a former Virgin Media O2 employee, Luke Coleman. He apparently sold confidential customer data.
Sold customer data. What was it used for?
It was used in a pretty major crypto scam, reportedly netting around $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So the conviction sends a really strong signal about data misuse.
And about individual accountability.
Absolutely. Steve Smart, the FCA's enforcement director, put out a statement. He said, and I quote, "This is our first prosecution under the Data Protection Act. Going forward, those who enable crime should be clear that we will use all of our powers to hold them to account."
All of our powers! That's strong language. It definitely shifts the focus beyond just the institution to the individuals handling the data.
It does. And that whole issue of data vulnerability links straight into third-party risk, which is such a massive focus for OPRES teams right now.
You mean like the M&S cyber attack?
Exactly. Marks & Spencer terminated its contract with Tata Consultancy Services, TCS, after a cyber attack cost them reportedly an estimated $300 million in lost operating profit.
And that was a third-party breach.
Apparently so. Exploiting help desk credentials, it seems. The really chilling insight for banks here is that a major retailer terminated a huge contract because of a breach at their supplier. It underlines just how critical managing vendor risk is.
And this is happening against a backdrop of constant threats, isn't it? I saw something about a massive Gmail leak.
Yeah, separate incident, but shows the scale. Reports of 183 million Gmail credentials being leaked due to info-stealer malware. It just highlights the sheer volume of compromised data out there.
And if cyber threats weren't enough operational stress, the Bank of England itself is facing potential disruption.
Yes, potential strike action. It's the security staff who are actually outsourced to a company called Amulet. They're planning to strike on November 13th over pay.
Security staff striking. What's the union saying?
Well, the union made quite a sensational claim, didn't they? Saying the strike leaves the bank's $200 billion gold reserves vulnerable.
Vulnerable? Surely the bank has contingencies.
You'd assume so. The bank spokesman said they have robust plans in place. But the incident itself really highlights the operational risks involved in outsourcing critical functions, especially something like physical security. Managing that relationship and ensuring resilience is key.
And just to round off the risk picture, we had that stark reminder of just how long legacy issues can hang around. The HSBC Madoff provision.
Yeah, quite incredible. HSBC taking a $1.1 billion provision hit this week. A huge charge relating back to the Madoff collapse, which was, what, 17 years ago?
17 years.
So it just goes to show, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Operational failures, conduct issues, they can stay on the balance sheet and impact profitability decades later. That long-tail risk is very real.
So looking back at the week, it's this real mix, isn't it? You've got the PRA trying to set this path for long-term, more proportionate regulation with strong and simple.
Yeah, the structural reform piece.
But then, bam, you've got the immediate multi-billion-pound financial damage threatened by the motor finance liability.
All happening against this backdrop of a really precarious fiscal situation ahead of the budget. It's incredibly complex.
It certainly is a high-pressure landscape for UK banking professionals right now. Okay, so for you, our listener, perhaps a final provocative thought to mull over this week.
Go on.
Well, the latest ONS data shows public sector pay growth surging ahead. It's running at 6%, I believe.
Right, whereas the private sector is lagging behind.
Considerably. Private sector average pay growth is about 4.4%. So you've got this widening gap opening up.
Okay, so what's the question for banking?
Well, given that fiscal black hole we talked about, and the looming tax rises which will hit everyone, how will this widening public versus private income divergence affect retail banking models?
I see. How do you assess future consumer credit risk? How do you stress test portfolios when you've got these two increasingly distinct segments of the population? Their ability to absorb financial shocks is, well, diverging quite rapidly.
Exactly. It adds another layer of complexity to credit risk assessment, doesn't it? Something for the credit committees everywhere to chew on.
Definitely one to think about.
Right, that's all from us this week. Thanks for listening to Reg Talk UK. Until next time, stay sharp and stay compliant.